don't know the breakdown of like, oh,
Hello, everybody. This is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Homeowner webinar, the last one of the year. My name is Claire Mitchell, and I will be hosting today. And we have an icebreaker question for everybody. Our question is, what is your favorite pollinator plant? Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it, we'll keep it friendly. We'll keep it. I'll go ahead and get started with mine because I was thinking, what pollinator plants do I have in my yard? My favorites, I think my hands down favorite is the sunshine mimosa. So if you have a sunny spot for a really aggressive ground cover to take over, yeah, sunshine mimosa, it's adorable, little puffball pink flowers that the bees just love. I also have blanket flower in my yard. I have tropical sage, and I have a moringa tree in my yard that like I see hummingbirds at sometimes. Aloe is also pretty good for hummingbirds. Very cute. Um, Laura, do you have any Dr. Warner pollinator plants that you love?
I really love the native basil. It is always covered in
Oh,
bees.
nice.
Such a fun
Oh,
plant.
another really good one. It's not native, but it's edible is borage. The pollinators go wild. All right, I'm gonna read some from the chat. We got giant ironweed. We got Turk's cap hibiscus. Um, we got a couple of hibiscus, snow square stem, Simpson stopper, and spotted bee balm. We have salvia. We gotta love the salvia. Ooh, African blue basil. That's a really, really nice one. I really like that one too. We have coral vine and scrub rosemary. I think scrub rosemary another name for Georgia calumet. Maybe Kaylee can weigh into this one. Yes, maybe. We got Mexican heather, climbing aster, blue sky cluster vine. Wow, never heard of that one. Ooh, wild coffee. Wow, okay, guys. Wow, we got some pollinator. Hi, hi, Deirdre. Deirdre likes goldenrod. We got a lot of really great pollinator plant suggestions here, and as far as I know, a lot of these will grow throughout the entire state. Maybe not all of them, but firebush is another really good one. Goes all the way up to North Florida as well. Well, thank you everybody for your suggestions. If y'all need some suggestions, scroll through this chat box real quick and you can pick up some good pollinator suggestions for your own yard. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introductions today. So as I said, my name is Claire Mitchell. I am the education manager for the Florida Friendly Landscaping State Office, and this is our homeowner webinar. This happens every third Tuesday of the month at 11. And today we have Dr. Laura Warner, who will speak with us today about pollinator gardens in HOA neighborhoods. First of all, your mics are muted. And if you have questions about the presentation, please share them in the Q&A box. And the chat box is going to be closed for the remainder of the presentation, but we'll be answering these questions at the end in the Q&A box. We also have an exit survey at the end, and this will be really helpful for getting feedback for next year's webinars. Lets us know what we're doing well, what we can improve on. So our next webinar will be in the new year, and it will be on January 20th. And your presenter will be me. I'm going to be talking about hiring Florida friendly. And we'll be talking about how and why to hire landscape professionals trained in Florida friendly landscaping practices, both in your home landscape and in your community's landscapes, if you're HOA or neighborhood contracts for landscape services. So if you'd like to register for next year's homeowner webinar series, the link is in the chat box right now, and you can click on it. And registering once will register you for all 12 webinars for the whole year. And you'll get a reminder, as the webinars approach. So that's a nice way to not miss any webinars. Okay, so as I said before, I'll be talking with Dr. Laura Warner. She is the professor of extension education in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication at UF. And Dr. Warner's experience lies in translating behavioral theory into practical applications with a focus on behavioral change, social marketing, and program evaluation. Her research centers on understanding the factors that influence the adoption of best practices, particularly those related to water conservation, water quality, and pollinator conservation. So, Dr. Warner, thank you so much for joining us today, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Claire. I am thrilled to be here with you all this morning and grateful to the FFL team for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so today I'm going to share some research that I've been working on the past couple of years that relates to protecting pollinators within homeowners associations, and it's been a really interesting area for me. I do want to acknowledge two colleagues. Some of the materials in this presentation were adapted from materials that were worked on or contributed by Jeremy Roden, who is an amazing extension agent in Marion County, and Armendra Kalani, who is an amazing PhD student in my Department of Agricultural Education. So I probably do not need to sell anyone on this call today about the importance of pollinators, but just kind of some things to think about that is pretty important is that pollinators really need our help. And there was a recent study just published this year that shows that more than 20% of pollinators in the U.S. are facing elevated extinction risk. So it's pretty major stuff. And a lot of this relates to human behavior, things that people do. So these declines have been driven by land use changes, urbanization, the way we manage our landscapes, and there's a lot of consequences which link to things such as human nutrient deficiencies and related deaths. So I'm really interested in how urban landscaping affects pollinators and natural resources. And a lot of times in rapidly urbanizing areas, the landscaping choices prioritize things like the look of the landscape and low maintenance. And the practices that are used include mowing, pruning, and leaf removal, which can harm pollinator habitats. And then chemical applications, such as pesticides, of course, can harm organisms that they aren't intended for. So really important to kind of look at our landscaping decisions and practices. So when we think about urban landscape and homeowners associations or HOAs in Florida, we have a ton. I believe Florida is only second to the state of California in how many people we have living in homeowners associations. In the United States, there's more than 74 million residents who live in these types of communities. And in Florida alone, we are approaching 10 million people, and these numbers are from 2021, so there's a very good chance we've exceeded that. People living in HOAs in Florida alone. And I've been really interested in HOAs over the past couple years. I'll tell you a little bit more about the social science research that I do in just a minute, but one thing I've found is that study after study, whether I'm looking at pollinator protection or water conservation engagement, that if we include living in an HOA as a factor or a variable in our research, it is almost always significant. Sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative. So we know that living in an HOA can be a really huge factor in how you take care of your yard. On the positive side, HOAs can motivate stewardship by promoting pride in wildlife and pollinator-friendly landscaping. HOAs can offer resources and provide expertise that support environmentally friendly landscape decisions, and just overall demonstrate commitment to pollinator-friendly plants, either through formal means, such as through design standards within the community, or informal things such as demonstration gardens that are within the community. So there are a few different kind of classes of behavior we can talk about as far as residents supporting pollinators. And the two that I'm focused on today are things that you can do within your own yard. So the first one is planting and maintaining pollinator gardens. And that would be establishing a new planting of a variety of plants that support habitat and food sources for pollinators. The second one is using wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance techniques or options. And many people who are interested in supporting pollinators are going to do both of these. But kind of the difference with wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance is that we're talking about things like maybe mowing less frequently or ensuring that we are identifying a pest before treating it and maybe avoiding chemical inputs altogether. So a lot of times people are going to be engaged in both of these within their own yard. And then there are other things you can do, whether you don't have a yard or you want to go beyond, by supporting local pollinator initiatives such as pollinator-friendly roadsides. But I won't be getting into that area today. So people, not everyone knows what social science research is or the human dimensions of pollinator support, which is the research that I do. So I'll just share what I focus on is I understand what drives human behavior. So here, what I'm sharing with you today is factors that shape pollinator-friendly actions. So I study mostly across the state of Florida, but also across the country. I study people's attitudes. I look at community dynamics, environmental values, knowledge of pollinator decline, knowledge of pollinator protective behaviors, and other types of perceptions, such as social norms, what people think others are doing or what others would approve of. And I also look to understand people's perceived barriers. And at the end of the day, when we're looking at whether someone engages in pollinator gardening or water conservation, it's kind of a cost benefit type of decision. And if the perceived barriers exceed the benefits or the good that a person is anticipating they'll get, they're not going to do it. So you'll hear me talk about barriers and motivators today. And this is really important as a social scientist to understand, because if someone thinks the barriers are too great, they're not going to engage in pollinator support. So what social science recognizes is that we need good technical information. So we need to understand how to plant a pollinator garden. We need to know the plants to select. We need to understand how to manage it and how to group plants appropriately to kind of maximize the resources offered to pollinators. That's important, but as a social scientist, I recognize that fostering a sense of stewardship and responsibility is just as critical as providing that technical guidance. So we need to go beyond just the how-to and understand really what is going on as people make decisions whether or not to support pollinators. Okay, so there's a lot of research that shows urban landscapes can support diverse pollinators with proper design and maintenance. And there's really a major need, as I already mentioned, to engage in pollinator gardening, to help connect habitats from one place to another. And something that has been demonstrated by quite a few researchers outside my team, but also in the research that I do, is that there is a lot of enthusiasm about pollinator gardening and wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. But when we look at actual engagement, actual behaviors, much, much lower. So the actual practices are not coming anywhere near where that interest is. So that is maybe disappointing, but on the other side of the coin, it means we have a huge opportunity to increase engagement. And a lot of the opportunity, I think, is happening in homeowners associations. So I'm sharing research that has been conducted over several years, and we've done a series of focus groups and interviews and quantitative surveys over the past maybe 4 to 5 years with both Florida residents to understand their engagement in both pollinator gardening and requesting wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. But we've also talked to green industry professionals to get their take on some of these practices. Okay, so I have a couple polls in this presentation for you, and I am going to ask you to kind of guess what our research showed. So I believe you should see it on your screen right now. But this first one is talking about Floridians who hire a landscape professional. So these are not your do-it-yourselfers. These are people who hire someone to take care of the yard, to take care of the hedges, that sort of thing. So we asked Floridians who hire a landscape professional where they stood in terms of requesting wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. And there were kind of 5 stages of behavior. I'm going to ask you where you think the largest number of Floridians said they stand. So were they mostly not thinking about asking their landscape professional for wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance? Were they considering it or thinking about it, but maybe not engaged? Were they getting ready to ask for these types of services? Were they already asking, or have they been doing it for a long time? So I'm going to ask you to think about where you think most people stood. I'm going to take just a minute for everyone to respond, if you would, please. Okay, I am going to ask Becky to close that poll, please, and let's see what you all had to say. Okay, let's see. So more than half of you got it right. More than half of you said that the majority are not thinking about it, and you're absolutely right. So, yeah, there is a huge proportion that are not even thinking about it, which, just like I said a minute ago, is on one hand kind of really disappointing, but on the other hand, it is kind of exciting because it's a real area of potential to get more folks involved in wildlife friendly landscape maintenance. And from a behavioral standpoint, we have kind of two pieces of this puzzle. So we need to have landscape professionals who are willing to engage in these services and offer these services, but then we need consumers to ask for them. Okay, so now we are going to do another poll, and this is a slightly different area. And this relates to people's knowledge about wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. So we asked residents about to self-rate their knowledge on a number of topics. And I'd like you to respond what you think people reported being least knowledgeable about. So, was it how to ask my landscape professional for services that protect wildlife and pollinators? How to ask my landscape professional about ways to maintain my yard without products? How to identify whether an insect is beneficial or harmful, excuse me. How to identify a wildlife-friendly plant, or when products should be applied to minimize harm to wildlife. So which do you think Florida residents knew the least about? Okay, let's close this poll and see what you all thought. Oh, this is interesting. Kind of spread out here. All right, so the number one by a very slim margin, how to identify whether an insect is beneficial or harmful. Number two actually got it. When products should be applied to minimize harm to wildlife. So yeah, that was the one that had the lowest knowledge rating. And you can see here, this is the knowledge items we looked at. Everything is relatively close together around the number three, which would be interpreted as moderately knowledgeable. So Floridians said they were most knowledgeable about how to read pesticide labels and how to identify invasive plant species. But they said they were least knowledgeable about when products should be applied to minimize harm to wildlife, and also least knowledgeable about how to identify a wildlife-friendly plant. Okay, so we're going to move on here to actual wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance services. Now, we asked residents across the state of Florida who hire green industry professionals to take care of their yard what the practices were that they specifically requested from their landscape professional. So I would like to see what you think was the one they said they requested most often. Avoiding the use of invasive plants, controlling existing invasive vegetation, appropriately using fertilizer only when needed, reducing fertilizer runoff, or leaving hollow stems for bees while pruning. Okay, let's go ahead and close that, please. And you all said that the most common was controlling invasive vegetation, followed by the appropriate use of fertilizer only when needed. Okay. Actually, what Floridians said is that most often they were requesting that their landscape professional avoided the use of invasive plants. So I have all of these kind of ranked here in the next slide. So talking about the most common practices, and there can be quite a few behaviors that fall under wildlife and pollinator friendly landscape maintenance. If you look at the right side, these are what consumers or residents are telling us that they're asking their green industry professional for. So you can see avoiding the use of invasive plant is the number one practice that Florida residents are saying that they're requesting from their green industry professional. And this is followed by controlling invasive vegetation, using fertilizer only when needed, reducing runoff, removing weeds before they go to seed, and selecting appropriate pesticide application methods. Kind of interesting, we asked the same question to green industry professionals, and the most common practices that they believe that consumers are asking for is kind of different. So definitely some different ideas around wildlife and pollinator friendly landscape maintenance. Green industry professionals say that they're being asked for mulch to suppress weeds and conserve moisture more than any other wildlife-friendly landscape practice. Use of appropriately placed native and Florida-friendly plants, planting species known to support wildlife, and things like removal and control of invasive vegetation actually falls lower on that list, according to them. I'll share towards the end, we have some resources that kind of contrast the perceptions between professionals and consumers. Okay. So if you remember, I talked about motivators and barriers and how when we make decisions, we do kind of a cost benefit analysis. So this poll is related to motivators for Florida residents who live in HOAs and hire a green industry professional for their landscape maintenance. So we asked them, what motivates you? Why do you want to request wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance from your landscape professional? And this poll is asking which was reported as the number one reason an HOA resident is going to request these types of services. Is it reducing the cost of taking care of your yard, enjoying the way your yard looks when it's maintained in this way, having an opportunity to watch wildlife, or meeting neighborhood expectations? Take maybe like 10 more seconds and then we'll close it. All right, let's see what you all thought. Ooh, interesting. Okay, our top number here is tied between reducing the cost of taking care of the yard and having an opportunity to watch wildlife. Having an opportunity to watch wildlife would be mine. I love watching my pollinators, but actually, neither one of these is right. The one that came in third place, meeting neighborhood expectations, was the number one reason HOA residents said that they would request wildlife and pollinator friendly landscape maintenance from their professional. So you can see where the social science really comes in here, and that's peer pressure. So there's some pretty strong social influences going on in HOAs, and that's represented here. And here's all of them ranked at the top, from the very top motivator going down. So meeting neighborhood expectations is the number one factor in whether your neighbor, if you live in an HOA, is going to request these types of services. Number two, supporting environmental values of the community. Number three, taking pride in your neighborhood's conservation efforts. And you'll notice these first three all have to do with being a part of this community, being a part of your neighborhood. These are all very strong social influences. And then we come to number four, people want to do the right thing. And number five, supporting plant diversity. And that comes after kind of all of these social influences. Okay. So sticking with motivators, we also, as I mentioned, talk to professionals, and these are the top three motivators professionals gave us as to why they would offer these types of services. So I think it's kind of interesting to look at these together. The number one reason that professionals are willing to offer us wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance services is because clients demand them. So when clients are asking for these types of services, they are most likely to offer them. Not surprising, but important to think about the choices we make and the landscape practices we ask for when we hire a professional. The number two reason is a desire to promote their company as environmentally or wildlife friendly and to sort of set themselves apart with specific services that aren't offered by everyone. And the third one is a public interest in beneficial wildlife. Okay, so we talked about the positive influences. Now I want to change direction and talk about those barriers and talk about the factors that prevent HOA residents from requesting wildlife and pollinator friendly landscape maintenance from the green industry professionals they hire. Becky, could you please go back to number 5 on this poll? So the question, we might have an issue with the poll. The question is, which item is the biggest barrier to HOA residents requesting wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance? Thanks, Becky. So, what is keeping HOA residents from requesting these services? Number one, their neighbors' expectations for how the yard is cared for. Number two, the cost of these services. Three, the time it takes. Or four, not knowing enough about this process. Give you just a minute here. Okay, let's close this poll and see what you said. Okay. So the majority, by just a little bit, said not knowing enough. The second choice here that you all picked is neighbors' expectations, and that is actually the top one. So I think this is really interesting. If you remember, we just talked about motivators, and neighbors' expectations was the top motivator, but here we're seeing it can also be the biggest barrier. So again, this shows us the importance of understanding these human dimensions. So here's the full list of the barriers that HOA residents around Florida reported as to why they may not request wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. Number one, again, neighbors' expectations. HOA residents also told us some of them didn't really care for the look of yards that were maintained with wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. They also didn't know how to ask for these types of services. So I think that's really important. Some of them said they just didn't like wildlife. And I think a lot of people, we may be talking about pollinators and butterflies, but some people also think about bees, snakes, that sort of thing. And folks also reported not seeing or believing the benefits of this type of maintenance and then just not knowing who to hire. So some really important barriers that for people to be engaged really need to be addressed. So again, we asked green industry professionals, what prevents you from offering these services? And the number one barrier that they reported was a lack of public awareness about sort of these alternative maintenance approaches as opposed to kind of what we might call traditional landscaping. And lack of awareness among clients. They told us that a lot of businesses focus on profit over site-specific maintenance. Number four, some of them were not offering these services because of HOA regulations. And the last one is that they said clients want a formal, perfectly trimmed garden that is perceived as being incompatible with wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance. And I think what is important in this item is the word perceived, because we know that we can have pollinator gardens that are very much formal, that fit whatever aesthetic may be in place in an HOA, and we can also have wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance that can have a formal look while still protecting pollinators and other wildlife. Okay, so this brings me to our final poll. We're going to switch gears to more strictly pollinator gardens here, but we asked Floridians who lived in HOAs if they were allowed to have a pollinator garden within their HOA. There were three responses. People could say yes, they could say no, or they could say unsure. So I'm curious what you think. What percentage of Florida residents reported they were unsure whether their community allowed pollinator gardens? Okay, let's close this one and see what you all said. Wow. Okay, so the most common response here today is 93. That's actually a little bit on the high side. Second one was 68. That's also on the high side. but the actual number was 42%. So 42% of Floridians who live in an HOA didn't know one way or another whether they were allowed to have a pollinator garden. And talking about potential, I think that is huge. That's 4 out of every 10. And I don't have it in this presentation, but we also looked at knowledge and actual engagement. And we found those 42% that didn't know if they could pollinator garden in their HOA. They had the lowest knowledge in our study about pollinator gardening, and they were also least likely to engage in pollinator gardening. So that is a huge percentage of people that likely has an opportunity to get more engaged. So kind of interesting stuff. So I think kind of taken together, all that we're learning about people's perceptions and especially these motivators and barriers really helps us to see why HOA rules and regulations matter. So just kind of looking at how residents perceive the rules. So statewide, HOA residents, 61% said their HOA has policies related to their landscaping, and I believe that's actually probably low. I think there's a percentage there that isn't aware of the policies, but 68% indicated that their HOA had penalties in place for certain ways that a landscape might look. While only 38% said their HOA rewarded residents for the look of their landscape. And 44 said, yes, my HOA allows pollinator gardens. And again, there's 42% who didn't know. So huge potential there. In some of our focus groups, we got some great information and understanding of people's various experiences with pollinator gardening in their communities. And people had received comments about maybe how their gardens didn't fit a particular norm, and they got comments like, "Oh, that's not very manicured," or "I'm going to call the county on them." And one resident told us about like he wanted to take the grass out and he got a fine, or getting a letter. So there were a lot of strong experiences that were expressed. And when we looked at the key predictors on whether residents were engaged in pollinator gardens, there were kind of three factors. And if somebody thought it was simple and they were able to see the benefits of pollinator gardening, and they also thought it was compatible with their community norms, with their values, with the way they took care of their yard, with their HOA rules, they were most likely to engage in pollinator gardening. So kind of some sort of recommendations we could take from this, whether you're a resident and you want to get engaged, or whether you're a master gardener volunteer, or you're a conservation professional trying to promote pollinator gardening. We can start small and simple. A pollinator garden starts from one plant. So you don't have to start with your entire yard. And you can start with some low maintenance plants or even container gardens. It's important to see it, to believe it. So demonstration gardens are super important in common areas of HOAs and public places. Virtual tours are also helpful, so we can see the benefits of these spaces. And in terms of compatibility, we can find a way to fit the community look. So pollinator gardens can be designed to match very formal or informal neighborhood aesthetics and fit within HOA guidelines. And it's important to highlight and understand the benefits. So pollinator gardens can save time, reduce costs, and support wildlife while being very beautiful to look at. Okay, so kind of taking everything together. Like I said earlier, there's a really strong interest in pollinator gardening, but there's a large proportion of residents who just don't know if they can have one of those types of gardens. So, and they're less likely to engage. There's a smaller yet important proportion of HOA residents who say, I absolutely cannot engage in pollinator gardening. But the reality is, many of them could have a pollinator garden that meets community guidelines. So, given that over 9 million, probably over 10 million Florida residents now live in HOAs, there's just a huge opportunity to correct some of the misperceptions and shift norms within this group. So I think this research gives kind of some recommendations, whether you're a resident, whether you are a leadership member of an HOA community, or whether you're a conservation or education practitioner or master gardener volunteer. So for residents, remember, we talked about those neighbors' expectations was one of the biggest factors. So for residents, if you're into protecting pollinators, you can encourage your neighbors to engage in pollinator gardening and wildlife and pollinator-friendly landscape maintenance and talk about it. You could create pollinator-friendly gardens and almost have your own demo garden to show what you can do with diverse and native flowering species. You could adopt wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance, whether you do your own maintenance or you hire a professional. You can engage in these practices yourself or ask for them. And participate in discussions within your community with your HOA leadership to normalize pollinator gardens and share educational research or resources, excuse me. So for HOA leadership, there's a real opportunity to clarify and communicate policies. So ensure residents know whether pollinator gardens are allowed and what the restrictions are to making changes. I think clear guidelines are really important. And I think HOA leadership has a role to play in reducing uncertainty, given how many didn't really understand what they are allowed to do. There are things we could do, such as offering templates and design examples for pollinator gardens that fit within a community's desired aesthetic and the desired norms, and showcase low maintenance, visually appealing options. And again, creating demonstration spaces within the community is a great way to provide education to residents, and signage and educational materials are a great way to foster stewardship and pride within the community. If you remember, that came up as an important factor. Now, for horticultural professionals, educators, and master gardener volunteers, there's a huge role to educate and empower residents. We can provide resources on pollinator gardening and wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance, teach clients how to identify beneficial insects, read pesticide labels, select plants. We can provide education, outreach, demonstrations, trial plants, opportunities to experiment. And overall, this is definitely a very social issue, so we can support shifts in the norm and work with communities to align landscape guidelines with Florida-friendly landscape principles and help residents navigate the approval processes so they can meet the rules, and maybe we can help make the process feel less complicated. So I have a number of resources that are available through IFAS and UF for folks that want some references about some of the research that I shared today. So we have HOA specific infographics and fact sheets. This one is for HOA residents on the roles that you can have in promoting pollinator gardens. This one is for HOA leadership on how pollinator gardens can suit your community. And then we have some information about promoting engagement in wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance, some of the perceived barriers and strategies to overcome them. And those were some of the infographics we've developed from these projects. And we also have on our EDIS fact sheet site different translations of the research, encouraging wildlife-friendly landscape maintenance, connecting professionals and the public. barriers and opportunities for pollinator gardening and strategies to increase adoption, if you want to read kind of in more detail about what we've discussed. And that was kind of a quick look at this interesting area of research I've had the opportunity to dive into recently. And again, it comes back to the importance of understanding the barriers. And in HOAs, they are different and much more social in nature than in yards that are not located within HOAs. Do you want to acknowledge I had a lot of support and a lot of collaboration in the research I described here today? And I want to thank you so much for having me. And I'm happy. I think there's time for questions here.
We had a lot of questions answered during this. Um, so I'm going to come back to some of those, but we're going to have some questions for you specifically, Dr. Warner, about the survey itself. So the questions from the polls, were they prompted as multiple choice or were they self-reported? Were they all multiple choice questions?
The questions in the polls, that's not how it appeared to the respondents. Those are from quantitative surveys that were distributed statewide. And for some of the items where there was a list, the respondents would be presented with a list in a randomized order for that particular question.
Let's see if there are any other specific ones. Most of these, okay, well, here's one. There are more and more Florida residents who are not resorting to landscape professionals. I'm wondering if they should also be included in these surveys or at least into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great point. So the research that talked about those factors, we collected all that same data from residents that do it themselves. I just didn't include it today because I was trying to keep it short. But yeah, very important. And also, and I don't have the findings off the top of my head, but we found different motivators and barriers among that audience. So yes, different factors.
Yeah, I will say too, just my work with FFL has been going towards working with HOA audiences. It's really interesting to learn that of all of the new housing developments in the Southeast, 80% of housing developments are HOAs, and many HOAs, they do contract out for landscaping services for the entire community or maybe just common areas. But these are things to think about if you do live in an HOA. It's becoming more and more common, and FFL has a lot of great resources for homeowners that do manage their own properties, but it gets a little more tricky if you don't make the decisions regarding your own landscape. So it's really interesting to hear, what can residents do if they want to promote these kind of gardens. So I have some, okay, okay, I got a couple more here. Did you know a difference in responses between 55 plus and family HOA communities?
Oh, that's a great question. We didn't collect like if it was an age restricted community. We did include age in some of the analyses, and I don't off the top of my head remember what those findings were. But that's a great question.
Okay. Okay, we have a lot of questions about these resources that we're providing. So this webinar will be posted, a recording will be posted on our FFL YouTube channel. And it's also posted on our website. So any webinar that you see throughout the year, you can go back and see a recording of it. Do you have any of these posted anywhere, Dr. Warner? Dr. Warner, or your resources?
The Well, they're all on the IFAS site. So
Okay. Okay, and then
um
speaking of resources, I put a million in the chat box. So we got a lot of resources because a lot of people are asking, well, okay, great. How do we actually implement this in our
Mm,
yard?
yeah.
But one of the greatest resources that FFL has is our bee and butterfly apps. And these are pollinator specific plants in each of these apps that you can search and find out the best bee pollinator plants for your yard in your specific region, in your county. And so that's a really great one. If you want to learn more about attracting wildlife to your yard, I put the link to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Handbook for Home Landscapes, and there's a whole chapter on attracting wildlife. And basically, what you want to think about is providing food, shelter, and safety, and water. Food, water, shelter, safety. So, there's a lot of really great resources that IFAS has created, and they're all in the chat. Let's look. This session was tough because in our HOA, we have a small company that is still getting the hang of mowing. Um, uh, we would like to go green here, but we don't know if we'd be able to. So a lot of these things too, is what Dr. Warren was saying was these are human-made barriers, and like we can change these things in our communities if we get some knowledge about how to do that. Do you have anything to follow up with that, Laura?
Oh, um, yeah, I mean, I think being engaged, being part of the conversations is going to be really important. I think probably my first recommendation would be for folks to contact their local extension agent for advice on kind of making some changes.
Um, Someone said, are there grants or incentives for HOA leadership to encourage their members to learn and plant for pollinators? Are you aware of
Hmm.
any incentives for that?
Um, I've seen some grants recently for like demo garden plantings, and I want
Mm-hmm.
to say a really good resource to look into is the Florida Wildflower Foundation. I believe they have some small grants. I don't know of anything that's like HOA specific
Right.
personally.
Yeah, I was going to put a link to the Florida Wildflower Foundation too. I'll put it in the chat right now as well because they have some great resources and support. Um, And one of some of the other things that I put in the chat box, y'all, because a lot of people are asking for more for speakers. So people said, "Oh, I really love this topic. Can someone in my county come and speak to my garden club or to my board?" Yes, there is someone out there who could, if they can fit in their schedule in the new year, yes, they can. And that is your local county extension agent. And can't tell you how many times that is the answer. Contact your local county extension agent. They know your community. They know your environment, both socially and physically, like your growing environment. And that is in the chat as well. It is contact your local county extension agent, and you can find out who to get in touch with. They will speak at your meeting, and they can provide more information about the projects that you want to do. I'm looking at some other things in here. Um, oh boy, lots of stuff about the resources in the handout. So of course, like look on our website for the um, the recording of this one. Okay, I'm gonna look for a couple more. Sorry, y'all, there's a lot. You had a lot of questions. Okay. A lot of these were already answered. So the last thing that I'm going to plug is our FFL state office resources. We have model language that you can use in your community's governing documents. HOAs have covenants, codes, and restrictions. They also have architectural guidelines. And so these can be changed. The covenants, codes, and restrictions are a little bit tougher to change because they need an attorney review. But many communities have architectural guidelines. This is What color can you paint your house? How high does your fence have to be? What color edging can you use in your landscape beds? What kind of hedges can you have and how must you maintain them? Things like that. So if the homeowners in your community do maintain their own landscapes and do get to make some of these choices, and you want to see more pollinator friendly practices in your architectural guidelines, you can ask for them. You can clarify with your landscaping committee or your board what is allowed and what is not. And so architectural guidelines can be changed with a vote from the committee or the board. They do not need a full community vote. They do not need to be updated with an attorney or filed with the state. So if this is something you want to see in your community, this is something you can ask for. And we have model language that you can directly insert into your governing documents. And so that is in here, FFO model covenants, conditions and restrictions. And then we also have a model landscape contract that you can use. You can take the parts that you like out and you can insert it into the landscaping contract that you have with your landscape professionals, whether that's in your own yard or if that's for your community's yard. And then the last thing I'm going to say, because I think we're coming up on the end here, is you can start small. Dr. Warner said that. And it can be a container garden. It can be a matter of putting it in the corner of your yard, maintaining it, keeping everything watered and looking great, replanting things when they come to the end of their life cycle. That can be it for your yard. You can start small for your community as well. You don't have to have all grass in your common spaces. You can have a pollinator garden. This is a demonstration garden. Have a community group in your neighborhood that takes care of it, keeps it looking good. So when people think, oh, I can't do pollinator gardens in my yard, they'll have that something that they can look at and and they can observe it and they can see how it's thriving. And then they can say, oh, I can try this in my yard. Do you have anything else to add about that, Dr. Warner, about just like the observability and trialability and things like that?
Hmm. Yeah, I really like the option for people to see kind of what your opportunities are. I think is really, really important. But just also this element of sort of sharing expectations and sharing what you like and what you're doing is supported in the research that is going to be very influential on what people do. So if you're somebody who loves your pollinators, tell your neighbors about it.
Yeah, for
Share
sure.
your seeds, give away plant cuttings.
Awesome. All right, Al. Well, thank you so much for attending today. We will see you in the new year. And we really appreciate everyone coming to our webinar, and we'll see you next time.